Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to another special Between Takes episode of Missing Frames. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. The 2020 Atlanta Film Festival coverage continues right now. That's right. This time we're chatting with our good friends over at Vanishing Angle, the people behind such amazing films as Thunder Road, Greener Grass, and the upcoming Wolf of Snow Hollow. They join me to chat about Danny Madden's new film, Beast. So what's this about? I'm going to tell you what it's about. Hold your horses. So the film follows this high school theater kid named Krista and her relationship with a new kid at the school, Nito. And Nito is like a total badass. He's got these insane skateboarding videos on his YouTube channel. He's awesome. It's no wonder why Krista would be like, oh, Nito, hey, what's up? So as they grow closer to one another, we also get to know Krista's gun-loving neighbor, Adam. And as the film plays out, these characters' lives will slowly but surely start to interact until they reach a surprising breaking point. So I actually got the chance to see Beast at Sundance back in January. You remember January, right? Where we didn't have anything to worry about. We could go to movie theaters. It was the best. But back then I chatted with Will Madden, who plays Adam. He's one of the film's leads, and the film's cinematographer, Christian Zuniga. So make sure, if you haven't listened to those interviews, you should go back and find them. Go listen. But this time around, we finally got Danny Madden, the writer and the director, on the show to chat about the film, as well as two of the film's producers, Matt Miller and Benjamin Wiessner. And hey, we even, just for kicks and giggles, we have a surprise cameo appearance by Pete Ohs, who's one of the film's amazing editors. So we discuss Danny's short film, Krista, and how it was expanded to feature length for Beast. We also talk about the energetic cinematography, the performances, the editing. It's all very, very loose. There's this improvisational, very naturalistic feel. But how do you do that? Especially with high schoolers, how do you keep things loose and colorful while also staying focused and sticking to a tight schedule? We chat about all of that, and it's amazing. These guys are really, really awesome. They're extremely talented. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, I need to go watch this movie. Where can I watch it? Well, Beast should be available early next year. I don't know exactly when, but you know who will know exactly when? Vanishing Angle. So make sure you're following them on social media. It's just at Vanishing Angle pretty much everywhere. You can also follow the Beast account on Twitter. It's at Ornana Films. I think I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I didn't. It's ORNANA Films. And it's also on Instagram at Beast Movie. But anyway, I had a great time chatting with everybody. I really appreciated them taking the time. And I hope you enjoy listening to the conversation.
Now available to own on video cassette.
Well, gentlemen, let's start by introducing ourselves to the audience. Matt, we'll start with you. We'll just go, alphabetically? That's not alphabetical.
Maturity. Let's go maturity level. I'll go last.
I guess that means I have to go first, and that's a low bar to set, though, for this group. I'm Matt Miller. I'm owner of Vanishing Angle, the production company behind Beast, and I was also one of the producers on the film.
I'm Benjamin Wiessner, and I produced Beast.
Danny Madden. I wrote and directed and a few other things on Beast, whatever needed to be done.
So you guys have known each other for a while, haven't you? Or did you guys meet? When did all this madness start?
Ben and I met in the Netherlands in 2007. We were in this program together, kind of exchange program thing over there. Went to the same college, and we became buds and sort of had our little cinematic misadventures together after that. And then we ended up helping Matt make a movie directed by Patrick Wang called The Grief of Others in 2014. And we all fell into being fast friends.
Yeah, I had actually not realized that I was a fan of Danny until like 4 weeks into shooting. Ben was telling me about the projects that they'd done, and he mentioned a short film called Notes on Biology that I was a huge fan of. And it actually like mandated that everybody in my office watch it. And then he was like, yeah, we did that. And I was like, Danny did that. And he's like, yeah. I was like, that Danny did Notes on Biology? And he was like, yeah. And I was just blown away that I was already a huge fan of him.
You didn't know him. You just found us out by a complete accident.
It was a complete accident. Like, we had been working together for 4 weeks, but I had seen the film like a year earlier and just been a huge fan.
Yeah, but in a production design capacity. I was production designing that film.
Did you guys all get to do that? Were you all kind of trying to figure out what would be the best fit for you? Matt, you were like, I'm going to produce. Ben, you were like, I'm down for producing. And Danny, you were like, I'm going to write and direct. Or was it kind of like
were there other roles or things you were thinking about doing at the time?
I mean, I got into this through film school as a like wanting to be a director. And then there was a point where I started the company because I understood there was like a void in my life of the type of producer I was looking for. And I realized I could fill that void for other directors very easily. And Ben, you came to this from a very different
poetry. Yeah, I just fell in with the wrong crowd, which was working with Danny quite a bit, and then also Jim Cummings as well. The two of them kind of bullied me into taking on film full time.
Strong-armed him, for sure. Yeah, I think for me, it's always like writing or directing was always the thing. So kind of what comes along with that is a little bit everything else. And now I find myself like working art department or doing animation or sound work or whatever. But to me, it all falls under the umbrella of how I define directing.
So what was the germ of the idea for Krista? It was a short film. Had you made a couple before that? Was that your first directing attempt? Where did that come from?
No. We'd been making shorts over the years, all different tones and mediums, and all across the board. And we just wanted to make a film in our neighborhood in Los Angeles, kind of tell this story about kind of the sort of cathartic power of theater and even just art making generally. And so we pieced it together with a few friends who we'd collaborated with in different forms before, and just kind of got a few folks together and made the short for super cheap and really low key. I like to tell people that it never left Premiere Pro. Like it never, even the sound mix and everything, it was like very casual kind of movie. And it was very surprising that it kind of had the like festival life it did, like through South by Southwest, and Vimeo did like a staff pick premiere with it and stuff. And then that kind of launched us on the path to Beast Beast.
I was going to say, it seems to be kind of a trend in the industry now, make a short film, take it to a festival, get some people interested with some money. Yeah. This didn't start that way. You were basically like, I'm going to make this. And then it kind of took on a life of its own, it sounded like, or did you have?
Yeah, I was finishing the short, Krista, when we all took off for Austin to make Thunder Road. And so I creative directed that. So kind of just like director support for Jim to help him make the movie he wanted to make. So I was sitting on a rough cut of Krista. And then so right on the tail end of that, I jumped into Ben's car and we drove, he was driving back to North Carolina where he was living at the time. And we just kind of talked about that. And we were like, hey, we felt good about how we put Thunder Road together. And Ben was basically like, you're on deck, man. Like, you're up next. Like, what do you got coming? And I was like, well, I'm feeling in this like Krista world, like that aesthetic. I feel like we kind of like unlocked something that I was interested in exploring more. So I basically spent the winter, like as I was finishing that movie and getting prepared for South by Southwest in March, I was like, I'm just going to have a rough draft of the screenplay done. I'd never completed a feature screenplay before. And I was like, I'm just going to do it and kind of piecemealed other ideas from like fallen feature attempts, and I kind of pieced them together and said, let's take an approach of 3 different vantage points of a town and a place, and let's see if we can tell a story.
Ben and Matt, were you involved at all in this creative process, or were you guys just cheering them on, kind of saying like, dude, let's make it happen? And what was the like big breakthrough as far as like, because Krista, there are similarities obviously, but in terms of the story, you expanded it in a completely different way for Beast Beast. So What was the breakthrough storytelling wise to get it to that point?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really kind of reassuring yourself that there's no rules with these things. And particularly when we're going to make a movie, like with what we can scrap together, it's almost like the less rules you're following, the better in a sense. It's like, how do you add texture to it? How do you really bring something genuine to a movie in a way that almost like a big budget film couldn't do? So I think all of those kind of like little challenges and instructions were floating around in my head. But really it was, inspired by like John Steinbeck's works that are like Tortilla Flat or Cannery Row or Pastures of Heaven that are sort of place-centric. And then you're getting these sort of like smaller stories, these vignettes of different characters that tell you about that place at that time. And I think that kind of thing really unlocked me. I'd reread Tortilla Flat for like the 3rd or 4th time and was like, it's kind of a bummer, but like, I think it's okay to make a movie that might get heavy like that, And I think for kind of happy-go-lucky tendencies that I have, I think that's where like maybe Ben and Matt came in and kind of helped me along in that way.
It's interesting. I feel like Danny and I have so often talked about and exchanged books as a real part of any process in a way that I think is for a lot of other partnerships would be, oh, check out this scene from this film or this from that. There's been a real freedom because what we're trying to go back to is something much more like a novel.
And to me, that just leaves the canvas a little bit more open to be creative with what you're doing in cinema, you know? So it's less referential in like an obvious sense. It's sort of like it's adaptive and referential to something that people might not even realize that there's like the seed was planted from this other place.
And I guess in terms of casting, once you started to get everything together, getting casting together, because the casting is so on point and all these kids are so authentic. But I know you'd known Shirley before because she was in Krista. I guess
Right.
She'd come to an audition, or
It was an open audition is how we found it. We were filming at the high school where she was going. So it was Cara Durrett who was producing the short. She had worked at the school before, and she's like, I'm just going to get in touch with the drama department and see if their kids want to come out and audition. We're like, cool. And Shirley came in, and it was total like, whoa, blew our hair back, kind of like, almost knew that she was it before she left the room, you know, just incredible raw talent. She's fierce. And then through that process, very much we all realized that we like wanted to keep working together and keep kind of pushing one another. Will is my brother, so I kind of I always like giving him kind of challenges and things that I'm like, this is gonna be really difficult and I don't know how anyone would pull this off. I'll just give it to Will and he'll figure it out, you know. And like I think he loves kind of like rising to that. And Jose Angeles is someone I met through our friend and collaborator Shawn Wells, who has done the color on like all the things I've directed. He was making a music video in the Bay Area. He's Oakland based. And he found this kid and was like, dude, you got to check out his like reel of like parkour and skateboarding and like gymnastics and like juggling. Like all these, like this kid is just
so
like,
weird and inventive. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, it was just, I just kind of like had this, like, I need to meet this dude, you know? So,
but he hadn't acted before. He'd never acted?
Not quite. He does have like a natural performance bone. Like he does some like stunt shows and stuff down at like Universal Studios in Florida. He does like the Halloween, like where he's like flaming, like juggling like flaming sticks and doing backflips and like, oh, there's pyrotechnics going on.
I
Like,
think you missed an opportunity here. This could have been a whole subplot of Beast Beast.
we didn't have the pyrotechnics budget quite worked out in the books. So he was coming down to visit his brother in Los Angeles. And I was like, hey, let's just like, you know, hop on skateboards and kind of hang out for the day. And we ended up going to Jim's house to borrow his camera. And we ended up just kind of like improvising scenes. Like it was like an old Hollywood screen test or something. Like, hey, like I like your look. Like, come on in. We'll see if you can act. You know, it was like that kind of thing. Like so I put him on camera with he and Jim, like improvising scenes, like some funny stuff, some serious stuff. And I was like, yeah, I think I'd like to do something with this kid. And so I wrote the 3 lead characters in Beast Beast for those actors. Mm. And then when Ben and I were prepping in Atlanta, we hired Jordan Brown, who's a great casting director down there. And she just like did such an amazing job, like her and her team trudging through thousands of tapes. Very kind of like, you know, quick process to kind of find the rest. And I think we filled in the cast.
It was so easy to do that too with what they brought us. It was just like, oh, great. Like we want all of these people on screen. Now, how do we filter this out? And it was a neat opportunity that we had as well, because the characters were all pretty open. We weren't casting racially or anything like that. It was just like, cool, who has what spirit, and let's go through and fill this out. And then what dynamic can we build with these actors? And
what flavors will that bring to what the movie is going to become? You know, I like to go at these things open-mindedly, and and Jordan just has such a great kind of finger on the pulse of the Atlanta scene. And she not only brought the people with the right talent, but she brought the people with the right attitude, I think.
Did you grow up in Atlanta?
Yeah, so Beast Beast is filmed, like the main house, the brick house is like, that's mom and dad's house. Like Will and I grew up in that place. So we definitely had to convince them to allow us to film there. They were already,
Thanks, Kevin Kim.
Yeah,
we love you.
But they were housing our 3 lead actors because we wanted each of them to have their own room, their own kind of space. And it was definitely a big first for everybody, you know? And then the rest of us just like piled into this other house we rented. We were sleeping on the floor and on couches and closets. Ben, you were in a closet, right?
Yeah, I was in Charlie's closet. Door didn't open or close to the closet.
Because the air mattress took up too much room in there.
It sounds like we're joking, but this has happened multiple times on multiple shoots where somebody ends up sleeping in a closet.
This is what it is. People think of the glamour of movie making, and they have to remember you got to take what you can get.
Yeah, the limo would come pick us up in the mornings, and we'd all come out of our closets, and
It was, I think, my 9th feature as a producer just this past winter where I slept in my own room.
Well, in fairness, though,
person.
that room became art department holding at one point. So while he did have his own bed, everything around the bed was set dressing for the rest of the house. Yeah. So essentially, we turned the bedroom into a closet.
That's the key, kids. Find a good closet. That's where you can be creative and just, that's where you make a movie.
I imagine logistically getting a bunch of kids and like having them hang out. What were the challenges of that? The energy is in the film. The energy I imagine that you were going for. I mean, it's in the editing, it's in the cinematography, it's in the sound design. But there's also the fact that it's like, oh my God, there are like 20 teenagers hanging out and just being nuts.
Theater kids, teenagers. There was one day when we were filming all that stuff and we needed to pivot because we're filming, we have like a day and a half with all those kids and we have to pivot from the fun kind of theater scenes to like the very heavy kind of serious stuff. And we need to get Shirley in this like very serious headspace. But everyone's just like singing show tunes and, doing cartwheels. And I remember like walking over to Ben and I was just kind of like wide eyed. And I was like, I did this to myself. I wrote this. This is nobody's fault but my own. I wrote scenes with like just dozens of enthusiastic theater kids running around. I was like, what did I think this was going to be? So then I had to sit down with, Shirley and Courtney Dietz, who plays Johanna. And we just like sat and was like, guys, look, everyone's going to follow your energy because you guys are the kind of rock here. I need you guys to be able to kind of switch into Zen mode, to go from like squirrely, because we're having fun, we're doing the thing, but I need you guys to like establish Zen mode when it's time. So then that became the joke. They all made fun of me for being like, oh, Zen mode? Is it Zen mode, Danny? And I was like, guys, please, just today, can we just do this? But it worked out. We got it. It kept it fun without being like a cranky grandpa,
We've all been camp counselors for long enough in our life.
Yeah, exactly.
So I talked with Christian in January.
Yeah.
He was chatting with me about like the different looks of the film for each character. Like Adam is kind of mostly on sticks and it's very kind of static in this sterile room in this environment. Whereas Jose and Shirley are very much like there's this energy and this wildness to it. But talk a little bit about that and coming up with the looks.
You always have to walk this line of like, oh, is that going to be an interesting idea? Or is that going to look like some like film school garbage?
Pretentious, yeah.
Like, is it like, oh, if we have each character has like a different shooting style, is that going to be like so like yawn, like that is ridiculous and stupid? So we had to find that balance because I was excited about the idea of kind of telling these three different stories with three different energies and then having them start to intersect, and which is, in some ways biting off more than maybe I could chew, but it was kind of like, well, let's figure it out. Let's try it. I mean, again, like back to talking about textures and like, what can we do on this movie? Like what can we try? Because that's the whole point of this, especially when you're making a movie like this, that kind of is low risk as far as like finances go and stuff, which means you should be pushing the craft and in some way pushing yourself and how you approach the craft. So it's like, well, let's try these different things and let's have the more kind of like meditative, deliberate character. Let's have the camera reflect that. And then let's also have the kind of like more playful, spontaneous moments. Let's get in there with the camera. It's not rocket science. It's not like the first time anyone's ever tried anything like that, but it's like, it did feel like, how do we complement what's going on with those characters? And I think there's a lot more to explore with that. Hopefully in further movies, we'll get better and better at it.
And it feels so spontaneous. And Christian suggested as much. He told me some very funny stories about your first AC. Was it Austin?
Austin and I had, so the first AC, for those who don't know, he's keeping focus, right? He's remotely trying to like go with it. And so we were shooting on like a very long lens most of the time and I'm moving around all over the place. So he is just, his eyes just burning, like glued to the screen. But we had a joke where they had this like battery belt thing that they would put on my shoulder and I would always move around. But there were some parts where I was like, oh, I'm going to just like sit still here. So they would put the battery belt on the ground. But then sometimes like halfway through the scene, I would just stand up and start moving towards them. So it became this joke where he would be like kind of setting me up and he would go, are you going to get up and move around on this one? I would go, no. And then he would look at me and he can go, but probably. So I was like, yeah. So that became like the catchphrase was like, are you going to move? No, but probably.
And he became known as Minimum Dan because he would just get way too close, way too off.
Yeah, there was half minimum focus with the.
There was a signal they had, like I can't remember the device, but he said it was basically like Morse code.
He would click it like Morse code, like Danny, I cannot focus that close, and then that would be my indicator to back up. So the idea of this movie was like the performances need to be watertight. We need to feel like we're hanging out with like these real humans. And part of that is like Jose's ability, his like putting his kind of physical skill set on screen and showing Shirley in her element and having Will train for months on how to like be really proficient with firearms and showcase those things. But part of it was like we didn't slate on set. We just like kind of started rolling. It was never like, all right, scene, 41, shot A, take 2, whatever. It was like, we just go, and our sound team, Chris Manza, our production sound mixer, was so great at being adaptable with all that. And we just time code synced the, sound to the camera. And so I could just hit record anytime and just like kind of give them a little signal to make sure they're rolling audio and go. And I think that helped, especially with people who hadn't like been on like a bigger movie set or in a feature. Shirley was like just turned 18. Jose had never really been on a set, so it was kind of like, how do you just make it comfortable and make them just kind of live in it? And so that was like part of the process that was pretty, bold, that resulted in getting that kind of more naturalism.
But I'd say overall, it wasn't, the improvisation always waited until we had captured what we needed for the scene and everything like that. We would try and build each block of the production day to have a little bit of that flexible room where it's like, okay, well, we've gotten something that can be in the film, and now let's get a little bit wilder with the camera. Let's get a little bit looser with the acting and everything.
Right.
Like
that's when kind of you get the best stuff, people really push.
Is there a lot of improvisation in the film? Was there anything that impressed you, surprised you, that you were like, we have to keep this in here?
Not in like a fundamental way, but in like little like decorative ways. Always. Like there are definitely some characters who, particularly Courtney Dietz and Daniel Rashid, who play the sort of like best friend characters of Nito and Krista. And I just like feel like their roles were smaller in the screenplay, but just the way that they attacked the role and their presence on the day and the way that they just kind of like commanded what that character was in that space, I feel like they kind of grew their characters. They like found room for their characters as the sort of sidekicks.
Ben and Matt, how do you encourage that vision, but also kind of give pointers and advice without kind of overstating your boundaries or anything like that?
People who are listening can't see Ben pointing to me.
Yes, he's
take this one.
Very gracious.
Well, I think what we do is we've always tried to work to find the best scenarios for each filmmaker that we work with. What we do is we do like, they're almost like test runs by doing short films with filmmakers first. And so with Danny, I mean, Ben and Danny had worked together on, I don't know, like 6 or 7 shorts before even coming to Vanishing Angle when you guys were at Bernana. And then at Vanishing Angle, we did, 2 or 3 shorts together. And a lot of those were animation based, but gave us a sense of how Danny works in post-production. And then we did a short film, the 3 of us, called Frolic in May, just before doing Krista. And so those were all opportunities to just see how best Danny works. So like the idea of he needs to get a ton of footage that isn't going to have a slate, like all of that was techniques developed on Frolic in May. I mean, a ton of Frolic in May we just shot without sound, just because we were like, okay, Danny's going to add all this sound in later. And then I think it was really doing the Krista short that Danny realized the technique of like, oh, he can shoot and sync sound and post using time code. So like these sort of evolved that by the time we did the sort of feature version, a lot of these systems had been worked out. Even with cinematography and stuff, of Danny understanding how things need to be lit so that he could get the flexibility to point the camera everywhere. Like even Danny evolving to operating a lot of the camera himself sort of slowly progressed of like him taking on some shots on Frolic in May, taking on more shots on Krista. And by the time he got the Beast feeling his confidence that he could take on the majority of it. So our job was more like cultivating that. And really the credit for Beast is Ben, who is the on the ground producer there, who was wearing multiple hats, like sometimes acting as the first AD, sometimes acting as the line producer, like fulfilling these different roles, often acting as the caterer, fulfilling these different roles that like seem small in some ways, but are actually helping that flow to keep within a container that we know Danny's going to work best in.
I would say that as much as we built in a lot of this freedom and a lot of these kind of wiggle rooms for our actors and tried to make everything as comfortable as possible, it was a lot of structure around that. And everybody was just like, the whole crew was hyper-focused the entire time because they knew we were always going to be moving in. And so it was just getting ahead of everything where we were really lighting most of the rooms that we were going into, where we'd walk the actors through it and then we'd light it for 270 or 360 degrees, where you could live in the space, and what you're doing is just like rolling around basically a key light as you're moving through the progression of shots. But we knew every day was storyboarded pretty directly, and we had this kind of rhythm that we had built up that allowed this freedom for the actors. But I wouldn't say there was looseness. It was just like a comfort that we were able to build for everybody.
I think we should shout out Brian Stansfield, our gaffer. Was just he's so on the ball, and like we did a couple just like really thorough tech scouts, and he just like was just so on it. There were some days where we like brought in like extra crew to help and everything, but it's like he just knew exactly what everything. And he and Christian have been working together for years, and they're on such a wavelength, and so it was like so fluid with that. And just before we move off of this subject, I need to also quickly shout out Mari Walker, who's our friend and fellow filmmaker. We convinced her to come down and operate as our DIT and like assistant editor and stuff, so she could kind of be around it and be with the gang. And she was the one spending long nights and early mornings syncing all the sound. And, you know, whenever anything went wrong, she was always thorough in there to set us up right. So shout out to Mari.
I think the real advantage of doing it that way, of taking the time to light it well once and then just tweak a little bit from there, is how usable the rest of that time is. While that side of the production is having the room and everything like that, it's a 25-minute, half-hour setup where we can take all of the actors out. Danny can be with them and working through the moments, because they just did it in the space so that we could light everywhere that they would be. And now you can work out all of those beats. So it's just about like the efficiency of how you can use all of these different parts of time.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the editing. Pete, I know you're in there somewhere if you want to come hang out with us. But again, the whole movie, the editing is on point. It's superb. The rhythm, there's certain moments in the film where you just feel the rhythm of it and the way things are cut. But I wanted to talk in particular about, there are two particularly stylistic sequences in the movies that feel a little bit out of the norm for the film, which are the party sequence and then the grocery store sequence. And I was watching Beast with my wife last night, and she's just watching the scene at the party when all hell's breaking loose and the police are there and people fighting and things going crazy. And she just turns to me and she goes, "How do you film something like this?" And I said, "Well, let me ask these guys tomorrow." So let me ask you, in terms of the editing, when you have a chaotic scene and it's very action heavy, how do you find the rhythm and how do you avoid losing focus or giving people headaches?
Well, I think first we should say that Danny also is an editor on the movie, as is David Brundage, who's not here.
He's here in spirit.
He's here in spirit. So certainly, like, there's stuff just within how it was shot. You know, like Danny has all these ideas throughout the whole scene of just the way actors are moving in and out and through the rooms and attacking this guy comes in. So that, like, there's already a lot of like ideas and tensions just within the way it's shot. So of course, like, you try to be as aware of that as you can as you're just like trying to use the footage. Like I think I find it helps to don't try to make something it isn't. It's like, this is intended to be a shot that brings the guy down the stairs to the wall. So it's like, just like use it as that. Because like you have so many decisions you have to make that if you're trying to go back to the infinite well of possibilities every single instance, then like you'll never actually get it done. And we're aware of that scene in particular as being a chaotic shoot practicality, like just for them when they were shooting. Right. Just like there's tons of people. It's like, I don't know what time of day or how much was already being shot that day, but this is what we have. And we're sitting here in front of a computer trying to make it be as good as anything we would ever watch. Like as good as something that's at like a certain standard that we are setting for ourselves that doesn't make us cringe. And so we just go through it like so many times and just keep like being really hard on ourselves and just being like, is that good enough? Is like, are we lying to ourselves that that's good enough? Like, like you want to be done. Of course you want to be done, but like you can't let yourself be done.
But then there's also things like especially with like very kinetic things like that. It's like we find a version like, oh, that works. Like that feels good. And then you're like, you step back for a second, you go, but that one punch looks a little like John Wicky. You know what I mean? And you're like, I don't think that's the really vibe we're going. Like it should be sloppier, like what a real fight looks like. And they're like, all right, well now we got to take that out, and can we sort of like shift the puzzle around and still make it work? But it's, I mean, I think bottom line is just a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, and like lots of little tweaks that make a big impact to our experience, our like heartbeat as we're watching it. Like a punch that feels bad, if you added 2 frames, like now it doesn't feel bad. Yeah. And then we would try things where sometimes we would cut out frames, like in the middle of a punch, like lose 1 frame, be like, oh, that was cool. But if you do it like with the next punch too, it's like now it's not cool.
Yeah. And then often to kind of glue things together, we would finish a sequence and then Pete would like go home and then I would be like, well, I'm going to do a sound pass on this now and then see what that reveals so that when we get back to it tomorrow, we'll see what kind of like how we can just lean into film, into sound. And same thing with like you're talking about the Hot Pockets kind of sequence, which is stylistically different. It's like, again, that was going through that and trying all these, we found all the takes that we liked of the story, but then it was like, well, when we're coming in and out of the storytelling and with the real world, does the music go from diegetic to non-diegetic, or does like the ambient, like the cicada sounds, do those drop out or do they come back? Like, do they stay when we're, it's all of these things make an emotional difference. And it sort of like determines what the cut is going to be and what it's going to want to be,
Is it more satisfying to do something that's like nuts and crazy like that? Or do you prefer, there's always this thing of like, a great movie soundtrack, you almost don't remember it when you leave the theater because it's it's part of, it's so ingrained into what you're seeing. Do you prefer doing something like crazy like that? Or do you like the sequences where it's slower and you're finding these rhythms where the cuts are almost just invisible?
I mean, I'd like it all. I don't even think I like one more than another one.
It also depends on the day. Like, it's not like we like sit down for a week and edit the whole movie. It's like we spent like months and months on this. So it's like some days it's like, well, let's just like work on that nice quiet scene today. And like,
right. Or you're like working on some of the really heavy scenes and you're like, can we stop?
Well, let's shift into that. The movie, you were immediately endeared to Nito and Krista. I'm watching Adam and I'm like, it's the toughest part of the film to pull off. And first of all, I think you did it, but because of the fact that you're so locked into this love story and this romance, that whenever you move back to Adam and the energy is so different, the challenge then becomes, well, how do we make this engaging? And you're talking about shifting tones and, some of the stuff gets really dark and it gets really intense. But Adam, due to Will's performance, due to the writing, feels so human. How do you find that balance, and where did it come from? The workshopping the script and getting it to a point where Adam feels a little bit more fleshed out, but what was the journey with that, and how do you find the balance between these like really almost contrasting moods at times?
I mean, I think with anything, it's just like the approach, the bottom line is like human, right? Like capital H, like what is human, and to me, humans are clumsy and profound and embarrassing and smooth. You know what I mean? And it's like, I like to see humans be humans on screen and in stories. And that was something that I realized, like writing it, I was interested in that and approaching a character like this from a place of empathy and trying to understand, his mindset and where he's coming from. And almost like one of the beginning stages is just knowing that I'm writing this for Will, because he is someone who can be incredibly serious and heavy, but also like incredibly funny. And it's like, well, let's write this character that kind of plays along that whole spectrum. And I know that, like, I don't know, I want to like be engaged when I'm watching a movie. And a lot of times, like, how do you fall in and relate with someone and laugh with somebody and, cringe at something they're doing. But all of these things kind of like help you just go along with it and invest in it. And at least for me, and so, yeah.
I think it's such an attractive thing for audience members to watch somebody really sincerely try and work at something that there's just a buy-in. There's moments where you're kind of laughing at him, but you're actually feeling what he feels as well. Where it's like, if I can just get this right, everything will be different. And that's something that's so relatable and that Will pulls off in this really incredible way where you just want him to get out of that bedroom and get into the world.
I completely agree. I think one of the thing that surprised me the most, there's a big climactic moment, and I thought there was no going back as far as Will's character went, but then he does this really upbeat, ridiculous video for his channel. And the fact that made me laugh after some pretty harrowing stuff, I was like, this is pretty impressive on every front, like what was pulled off by you guys and Will too.
Which is the best part about seeing it with an audience, because if we learned anything from watching Thunder Road with a bunch of audiences, it's that sometimes people need permission to laugh. And that's one of the beautiful things about the camaraderie that comes with a film screening in a theater is like, because some things that people would go, ooh, that somebody in the first row is laughing, and then you can kind of like feel the wave of it move across the theater, and you're like, oh, we can laugh at that? Oh my God, okay, good, because I kind of felt a little bit of that, but like, ooh, and so, yeah, like you're saying, like that late in the movie when you know, shit is hitting the fan, to keep it vague, it was kind of amazing to us to like feel like people could still be with it. We're with him in that way.
Was Sundance the first time you saw it with an audience?
Sundance was, yeah, that was the premiere. Well, we did like test screenings and things along the way, but you know, like any other movie in our situation, we were scrambling till the very last minute and finishing the movie.
Part of this process that I think is different than a lot of films that we've always embraced and we heartedly embraced on this film was the feedback screenings. You know, we have a screening room at Vanishing Angle, and I mean, we screened Beast countless times to small and large rooms. I mean, yeah, Ben's trying to count and he ran out of fingers. Yeah, I mean, we, you know, besides the fact that, Shawn, as you know, we have a group that we call Fun Lab, which is like a creative workshop, which Danny had the script pass through. So it was like really rewarding to then have that creative group also give feedback when the edit ran through. But then we also had various feedback where we say like, okay, like let's invite in other directors that we know, other friends, family.
Actors, like, editors, yeah, everyone. Bring your boyfriends and girlfriends, and you know, it was great. I mean, it was also, it's cool to just realize how many like trusted friends we have, because we filled that screening room, you know, with 25 fresh people again and again and again. It was really great. So
what was the most surprising reaction? Like, was there something where people laughed and you were like, I was not expecting that, or the opposite?
No, I think that everyone came in with like really great just ideas and things. I think that the most surprising thing to me was how much, again, the sort of like Tetris cube of it all could shift. And we could take this scene that happens over here and put it over there and stick this over there and get rid of this scene that like we just kept trying and trying and trying. It was never working. And then enough people were like, yeah, I could see it working without that. And these are trusted like other filmmakers whose work that I appreciate. And you know, it's that kind of thing. You're like, okay, well, let's just try, you know. So I think for me, the surprise was how malleable it is. When in my mind, it was that there were so many things that were concrete about it. And so, yeah, so to me, it was just like, it was an amazing process to just learn and keep learning. And hopefully each one feels like that.
There's also doing so many feedback screenings. It was fun to observe the evolution of the conversations that people would have. We would have one where everyone just, the whole conversation, the whole like hour long after the screening, everyone's just talking about this one chunk of the movie, just like, this is the problem or this, and like people are arguing about it, like some people saying like, no, that's good, that should stay exactly how it is, and other people are like all disrupted about it. And then we, you know, come back together and talk through like, what did any of that mean? Do we listen to any of it? And then do whatever changes we think are good. And then at a certain point, the feedback screening, that no longer becomes what people are talking about. They've now moved on to some other part that had never come up before. Right. And like now we're talking about this other section. So just observing the change, like showed that at least we were doing something, I think, you know? Yeah. And that it also never came like back around. Like we didn't kind of like, the things we solved remained solved, and the new problems that like were now like the number one issue.
Right. And when the number one issue became like smaller and smaller, like less and less significant things, it's like, okay, I think we're getting close, you know?
I remember one of the last ones was just kind of like this really intense debate about what song should be at the end of the movie. And I was like, okay, we're really close to being done there.
We're in a good place. Yeah.
I mean, I remember the last screening. We had our largest crowd. There were probably 30 people, maybe more. There were so many people that I had to lie on the floor with other people. Like that's how many people were lying on the floor. Like there was like multiple of us lying on the floor. And it was still a ton of discussion afterwards. And I remember, Danny, you and I just talked, and I was like, man, people had so much to say about this movie. It sounds like we're picture locked. Like,
yeah. And I was like, oh, Matt, I could tinker with this. No, that did feel good when people are just talking about what's in the movie. Right. And it becomes the conversation that you hope when people have just watched the finished movie. That's when, I think that's what you're saying, Matt.
Yeah, the worst possible thing, I think, is to do a feedback screening and nobody has anything to say. Yeah. There's no debate, and everybody's like, yeah, you know, you did a good job. Thanks for showing me. Like, then you're like, oh, God, this movie's awful. Like, we have to change everything and make people upset.
Right.
So what are the biggest takeaways, biggest lessons learned?
You careful of your beard with spiders. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned.
That was the scariest moment of all. Ben had a spider crawling in his beard one night.
Woke up and it was brown recluse that I crushed in my hand.
Oh my
thrown on the
God.
floor.
And you were like, making movies, living the dream.
Yeah, Ben was sleeping in the sort of room that we set up as the production office, the corner that we set up as the production office, on the floor, because like one of our other actors had come into town, so you surrendered your closet for a couple of nights, and you got to hang out with the spiders.
So important safety tip, don't sleep on the floor.
I would say I learned, and I suppose this could like apply to anyone in any kind of like creative or collaborative situation, but I learned a lot from Danny. Like Danny is a filmmaker, of course, but also like an editor. Like he edited all or most of all his stuff. And so when we're sitting there editing, it really is just like these two people both just trying to like make a thing together. Mm-hmm. But Danny's experience and attention around sound is something that I hadn't considered as deeply as he considers it. I think everyone who makes a movie considers sound, obviously. But the level, the depth to which he considers it was enlightening to me. And it became this thing, because like a movie, there's energy that's going throughout the movie, and there are pockets where there isn't energy. And if you're aware that like sound is this thing that you can use to really just like pump or shape whatever energy you want to be there, it just becomes this whole other world of possibilities to make your movie better.
I would say for me, a big takeaway lesson, and we've done this on a few films now, but just the sort of the family feeling of being able to set a movie up like that and get these like amazing collaborators to come in and really establish an environment where they can love it so much and put so much of themselves into it, whether they're doing, our friend Lauren Wilde on hair and makeup, or Jordan in casting, or, like every single person involved can like really feel like this is a vessel for them to push themselves, and that to me is like, once we wrapped the movie, I was like, I know there's so much great stuff in there with what all the actors brought and what all the camera team did, what we did, it's like, it's there, like the essence of it is there. And I think that then it just becomes a sort of like excavating that and like assembling it into something that echoes that feeling, So I think process wise, it's just like, the more we can keep that spirit going, I'm very excited about that.
There's a line of poetry I love, lessons so important you'll learn them your whole life. And that very much felt like, okay, that's the most important thing to take away from Beast for me, was just what a set culture could be, where you're really putting people in positions to succeed and collaborate and give an effort where they're bringing something that you don't know needs to be there yet. So I think giving those opportunities and just that level of communication and open collaboration.
Yeah, I think it's less lessons learned and more like hopes and ideas validated. Like I think it's, everybody went in with, like Ben said, these grand desires to make a film a certain way, and it was more like, oh, this is possible. We didn't learn, we were just happy to discover this can happen this way, and it's repeatable, and we can do it again on larger and larger scales. And
it's really that's the only reason why the film was able to get where it's been so far, why it was a Sundance South by Southwest selection, is because there were 60 different storytellers who have put their hands on it and their mark on it in all of these different ways, that it was really this vessel where everybody could be pouring themselves into it. And just like that generosity of people's creativity and how people treated each other and all of that, I think that stuff shows up on screen so clearly.
There's a Norman Rockwell would say, if anyone ever loves a character that I paint, it's because I love them first. And I just love that idea, applying that to it.
No one else got attacked by a spider?
Yeah.
I'm really just looking for like spider stories.
I know, we should have closed with Ben's. Can you edit it so that Ben's spider
we'll
story
make that the end of the story.
Yeah.
I do a podcast called Missing Frames where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives. So what's the movie for each of you that you need to have seen?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind to me is I've never seen Sophie's Choice, And I have this thing now where I should just watch it, because anytime someone starts to like, oh, it's like you're doing a real, and I'm like, I'll like cover my ears and be like, no, don't tell me. I don't know what the choice is.
No, you didn't. I've never seen Sophie's Choice either.
Me neither.
You know,
Watch it together.
Well, hold on, everyone shut up.
Can I spoil it?
I need to go watch it before this podcast airs because I'm screwed.
I will say the pandemic, I caught up on a lot of those. Like before the pandemic, I'd never seen like Training Day or Brokeback Mountain or like a bunch of these ones that everybody was like, they're kind of staples that you have to see. But I kind of was like, no, but I know what happens. I get what the movie is. But I still like have carved out some time to watch a lot of those. So there's very few on my list these days.
I haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia. I haven't seen, what was another one somebody just said?
Danny, what have you been doing? You haven't made Pete watch that 5 times?
He talks about it all the time, and I always go like, because you can see like I've seen the shot of like
like blowing out the match.
The desert and
running across.
Yeah, that's all you need to know. It's got wide shots. Yeah.
I've never seen the Tarkovsky version of Solaris.
There you go.
That's one I definitely want to see.
That counts.
I'll use that.
I just looked up the AFI Top 100 and realized for the first time that I don't think I've ever seen Wizard of Oz. That was a real surprise to me.
This interview's over.
Just delete everything, Shawn. This isn't even worth
This is all over.
Part of your podcast, Shawn, should be asking people who haven't seen the movie to describe what they think it's about before seeing it.
I do that.
Like,
Yeah, see, Matt, you're assuming I'm not a genius. I'm clearly a genius.
You got to stop that, because I don't want anyone to ask me to guess what Sophie's choice is, okay? So everyone just shut up.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you again. Thank you for taking the time. I can't wait for people to see it. It's really, really great. I really enjoyed it. So congratulations to all of you.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Shawn.
Thanks for editing us to make us sound so smart and wonderful.